Welcome back. Hour number 2 of the program on a Tuesday afternoon. I am Dan Mason at 852-TALK at 800-564-KKOH. Gun violence, schools, the workplace, public places. Ever since the Newtown tragedy, the debate has been raging. We're going to take that off into a little different direction here as we welcome back to the program Joey Walker, leading edge threat mitigation, former Reno police officer, Los Angeles, many, many years in law enforcement and government work. And it's been about a year since we had you in here to talk a little bit about this. Thought it was a good time for an update.
Absolutely.
Great to see you again.
Good to be here.
With everything that's been going on, I know a lot of what you do involves stalking, mitigating those kind of threats, but there are so many new areas now that I guess are landing in your lap. The workplace, public places. Describe, you say threat mitigation. Is it really about people educating themselves on what's going on around them?
The biggest problem that I see is that people are using antiquated laws, antiquated situations, and antiquated solutions to try to solve a problem that's occurring today. And they have to get past the stuff that's occurred, that the old way of solving problems, and look at a new solution. And sometimes that new solution is a multifaceted approach to try to solve a problem, such as a personal protection plan for individuals that are going through a stalking situation, or a personal protection plan for an individual who's looking at a workplace violence situation. And again, we talked about those things intertwining between workplace violence and stalking and active shooters.
So everything that's been discussed since Newtown occurred, you think it's a lot of the old solutions and we really haven't progressed to the point where we've got to start looking at some other ways to approach this?
Some of it is. We were talking, and I've had 1,000 different conversations since then and now. And I would tell you that fortifying and hardening the perimeter of a specific place, a location, a school or a workplace, that helps, but that is not the only answer. You have to educate the people that are on the inside. You have to educate, whether it's a school, the administrators. If you have to have a workplace, you have to educate the people who are actually in management. And they have to be accepting and willing to integrate policies and procedural changes to safe the workplace, to make the workplace a safer an environment.
Okay, let's begin here. Describe what we refer to an active shooter situation. What exactly does that mean?
That means a person who is in a public or private setting who is actively engaged in shooting and killing innocent people.
So that can pretty much apply to many of what we've talked about. The movie theater in Aurora, Newtown, gosh, almost any of these scenarios.
There are countless amounts of them, and if you Google them up on internet, you'd find where you've had shooting situations that aren't even making the national news anymore because they're such commonplace in situations.
So we've got different kinds. We've got the stuff that's happening in public places like the movie theater in Aurora, maybe the mall in Portland recently. Then we've got the schools, obviously, Newtown being the most recent one in our mind. And then we've got public places like that. Plus, then we've got workplace incidents. What's different, if anything, about some of these?
The only thing that's different typically is that the relationship that involves in a workplace is typically a former or current employee who comes back to the workplace in a situation where they've been disciplined or fired, and they come back sometimes days, sometimes hours, sometimes years after the event. We've got current work employees who actually come into the work environment based upon a threat or situation. There's a one that I'm thinking of in Cupertino, California, where the gentleman was at a safety meeting at 6 o'clock in the morning. He opened fire with a handgun during the safety meeting and then stepped outside to obtain his AK-47 and began shooting and killing his coworkers. Gee
whiz. It just seems like it gets worse all the time. Now, we've got various scenarios, and a lot of what's been talked about from Newtown especially is personal protection and people being armed. And we've heard, if maybe the teacher was armed, we might have stopped this. There's some danger in all of these people being out there armed, isn't there?
Absolutely. And the problem that I see with everyone just thinking, well, just give everyone a gun, because that's not always the answer, is that even as a retired lieutenant with the Reno Police Department, I can tell you that I carry a gun when I'm out in public.
Right.
Any person that is an active law enforcement officer should be carrying a gun out in public to protect themselves and their family. That's number one. Number two, in the event that a situation unfortunately unfolds in front of you, I still don't have all the protections that I would have if I were on duty, such as a bulletproof vest, such as immediate and instant communications with any law enforcement agency to be able to get on the radio.
Yeah, call for backup.
Exactly, and let them know shots fired, the specific location, and the description of the shooter. So if I'm off duty, or in this case now retired, and I see an individual, let's say at the local mall or the local movie theater.
Or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Exactly, wherever it could happen, and it could happen in restaurants, public libraries, McDonald's, any number of places.
So you're off duty.
Churches.
You're off duty. The situation is automatically different.
Absolutely. And even if I were a working police officer at the time this occurred, but off duty, I still don't have those protections of the radio. I still don't have the protections of the bulletproof vest and all the other things, the tools that I would have with me, typically ordinarily doing a normal course of my duty.
Okay, so we've got somebody who's out, they're armed legally, we hope, and they get involved in a situation like this. What about somebody who's not armed? I mean, what do you do if you find yourself suddenly in the middle of a situation? You're at the mall or the theater or whatever it might be. What do you do?
Exactly. That's one of the things I teach classes about. And one of the three common things we want to take a look at is if you're not in the environment, it's hard to get shot. I mean, so you want to escape. Obviously, you want to be away from the shooting scene. You want to put it a whole different building, a whole nother building, a different building, a location between you and the last known location of the shooter.
I guess that would be most everybody's instinct was, okay, this is bad. I got to get out of here.
Exactly. And people want to run for their cars, not necessarily run directly to the car, but they want to run to a car, to a vehicle, jump in the vehicle and leave. Sometimes you may have to leave and not have your vehicle with you. Sometimes you may be in a situation where you want to put another vehicle or another building between you and the last known location of the shooter. So let's say you
put anything between you and him,
exactly.
Right?
You don't want to be in a situation where the person's shooting and you're actually looking around and getting shot based upon, I want to be a great eyewitness. No, you want to get your head down and get the heck out of the way, out of bullet's harm. Yeah,
that makes perfect sense to me. So that's the first thing you do. Anything else?
Yeah, there's two other options at least. The second option I would take a look at is if you cannot escape, you want to be able to shelter in place. But that brings about certain dangers. In sheltering in place, I typically don't want to go into a room where there's one way in and one way out. The problem there is that if the shooter breaches the location, then I'm stuck.
Yeah.
But if that's my only choice in terms of sheltering in place, that's an option I'm going to choose. Thirdly, I may have to take on the shooter. And taking on the shooter is a very tough animal because taking on the shooter...
Armed or not.
Exactly. People tell you, I want you to take on the shooter, but they never tell you how. They never tell you what to do.
Everybody, I would have taken him out if I'd have been there.
No,
sure you would.
Exactly. And I can tell you that the use of deadly force is nothing that you can take lightly. If you've ever been in a situation where you've actually pulled a gun on someone and held them at gunpoint and the potential of either A, knowing that I'm going to have to fire this weapon, or B, having fired the weapon at an individual to potentially take their life, that's a whole different animal.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a phone interview with a group of folks from Ohio that had gotten involved with a program. They were raising money to teach teachers and other people how to protect themselves with a firearm. And they had a big list of things that you've got to deal with in those kind of situations, and that's the biggest concern I know that you probably have. I'm sure it's the biggest concern police have and others, is the lack of training. You just can't have a bunch of people out there armed with a handgun and assume they know what they're doing.
Exactly, and it's different when you're shooting on a range and shooting targets or metal targets or paper targets than actually taking a human life, and understanding that when you fire a weapon at someone, there are consequences to that. And I guarantee you there will be an investigation by the police department, by the district attorney's office, and if that individual is struck, there will be a separate investigation based upon if the individual lives or not. They typically come back and sue you later. So you've got a minimum of 3. Now, I'm not saying you should be worrying about those kind of investigations. You have to take care of business when business occurs. But
I mean, whatever's in front of you is in front of you, and you got to figure it out.
But you've got to be able to understand that firing a weapon has a serious consequence and responsibility and liability attached to it.
Not something to take lightly, that's for sure. Joey Walker is here, Leading Edge Threat Mitigation. Unfortunately, we can report that with recent events in Newtown and all the gun violence discussion, business has picked up I guess.
Yes, fortunately and unfortunately at the same time.
So we were talking about scenarios. If you find yourself involved in an active shooter situation, armed or unarmed, what do you do?
So again, recapping, the first thing you want to do is to make sure you can escape. If you cannot escape, the next thing is to shelter in place.
That's always the best option,
To
is just
hide.
try to get away or
Try
hide?
to get away.
Okay.
Try to get away. Try to put a different building between you and the shooter, this last known location.
Right.
And then the third option we talked about is taking the shooter out, which is not like it's in Hollywood. It's not like a Jackie Chan movie where you're going to open up a can on him. You've got to understand that that's a really fine skill that a person has to go through in terms of training, in terms of being able to take the shooter on, hands-on, physical, defensive tactics.
So most of us aren't Chuck Norris, is what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Or to be able to shoot and take this individual out.
If you happen to be armed.
Correct.
Okay. I want to grab a phone call here. Somebody who claims to know you. His name is Bill. Welcome to News Talk 780 KOH. Hi, Bill. You're on with Joey Walker.
Hi, Joey.
Hi.
Long time no talk to.
Yeah, Bill. How's it going?
It's good. One thing you forgot is that even though we're trained and we're at the range, officers usually hit only about 50% of the time. Once that bullet leaves the gun, you're responsible. And if it hits a innocent, then you're really facing some problems. That's why, they spend so much time with us on the range.
And absolutely. And even though the amount of time that we spend on the range qualifying, whether it's a quarterly basis, whether it's as often as you want to specifically spend on the range, in a shooting situation, your adrenaline rush is going to be off the charts. You're going to be dealing with nerves. You're going to be dealing with a lot of different things and factors, and even if the person's moving. So a lot of factors are in play. And yes, if you do hit a civilian or a person that you really didn't intend to strike with that bullet, that opens up a different can of liability.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate the call. How does your psychology change as you find yourself in the middle of something like this?
That's something that you have to mentally prepare for, and the crisis rehearsal of going through an active shooter or any kind of critical incident is imperative. That any police officer that's been out there, that's been working for any period of time, goes through that crisis rehearsal and goes through the what-ifs throughout their career. As they're responding to a call, whether they've gotten to the call and done whatever they needed to do, they're still going to go through and what if this situation had happened, and to play those things back in their mind and then debrief them and then try to figure out a different way and methodology to handle them tactically better the next time.
In the process of doing what you do with threat mitigation, are there certain personalities that are better equipped to handle this sort of thing than others, or?
You can teach a person to be able to do all the moves physically, but you can't make that person actually react.
You can't get inside their head and know for
Exactly.
sure what they're going to do.
The old, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, can't make him thirsty.
Yeah. So how often does somebody, without obviously intending to, make a situation much worse by choosing a bad course of action?
Sometimes those things can be unfortunate based upon we find ourselves in situations we want to do good things, but we put ourselves in harm's way because we don't have the tactics, we don't have the training, we don't have the likelihood. I was talking about earlier about a radio interview I heard this morning on a different radio station that basically talked about an individual in a mall in a shooting situation, and he just came upon this active shooter. He's a person who is carrying a concealed weapon and decided that he's going to take on the shooter.
Okay.
So as soon as he hears the shots fired, he takes out his firearm, and apparently it's a handgun. He's looking for the shooter. The shots stopped firing, so he put his weapon almost away, but almost like down to his side or in his pocket. He continues looking for the shooter, and when he comes upon the shooter, makes face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball communication with the shooter.
Right.
The next thing he does is tells the shooter, "Son, you want to put the gun down." At that point, the shooter turned and fired, striking the civilian who had the firearm, the good guy,
right,
who goes to the ground and unable to return fire and take on the active shooter. The shooter then leaves that location and goes into a store inside that mall and takes hostages. So
that didn't help at all.
So now this person is on the ground. The end result is the person who came upon him, the Good Samaritan trying to stop the shooting, is now paralyzed and says he's in excruciating pain. So here's the problem, is that we all think that we are applying the rules of the old Wild West.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That you've got to be able to look the shooter in the eye and take the shooter on and tell the person to put the gun down and things of that nature. And those are the things that we talk about and teach specifically in active shooter, or how to survive an active shooter course for people who actually have a CCW permit.
The job of a law enforcement officer in a situation like this, let's say a public place. Let's take the scenario you were just talking about, in a mall.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the active shooter. Now you've got Joe Civilian, who is carrying his concealed weapon, and he draws it, and let's say he doesn't put it away, and he's making his way down the mall, and he's trying to find the shooter.
Right.
And law enforcement comes along, because they've heard the report that somebody's in the mall shooting, and now they've got two guys with guns.
And they don't know who the good guy is.
Yeah,
and
I was
going to
say,
guy.
What do they do? How do they know? I mean, that's got to really, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, muck up the works.
Absolutely. It definitely puts a crimp in there. And so you have to take a look at, from a law enforcement perspective, the training and that specific policy of that agency. Perhaps their policy may be not to issue verbal warnings and to see the shooter and take the shooter on without a warning, which means that they actually shoot the shooter and put the shooter down.
And is that different from department to department? Or they kind of establish their own policy on how to handle that?
It could be.
There is no uniform. Everybody do it this way.
Well, I don't want to reveal that one, but
okay.
I'm telling you that it could be, or maybe not.
I can see that. That could be a really ticklish situation for a law enforcement officer.
And for that individual who is the Good Samaritan who is carrying the gun, trying to stop the active shooter, he presents a unique challenge to himself and to others because they may think he's the shooter.
Yeah.
So in teaching these types of courses, these types of items are discussed in terms of how to actually get through the situation and survive it.
Yeah, it's kind of the old adage, shoot first, ask questions later. That could be a bad case.
It's bad all the way around.
Oh, boy. What kind of an effect have recent results made on people seeking training, the people who are coming to you and say, hey, I want this training in case I'm ever in this kind of situation? What are those people telling you?
Well, I've got some mixed results, and I've got some people who basically stick their heads in the sand who, we don't need your help. We don't need any help whatsoever. And the unfortunate situation there is that what are they doing? And I can tell you that I've talked with people who are in school districts who, and that's plural, by the way.
Right.
I can tell you I've talked to people who are in businesses who have said, we need your training. I've also talked to groups who said nothing. I've sent emails, I've talked with individuals, and they stick their heads in the sand and pretend that nothing's happening. And by fortifying the front door and asking for extra police patrols, that's the answer. You have to teach people what to do when the shooting starts at their facility. And this is like lightning striking. You can't predict and you can't determine where it's going to happen next.
Yeah, that's true.
And you think, well, it's not going to happen to Reno. Well, guess what, folks? It does. It did. It will. It's just a matter of location and a matter of time.
With all the discussion since Newtown about teachers in schools and whether teachers should be allowed to carry if they have a permit, it sounds to me like teachers, regardless of the situation, could benefit from learning some of your training when they're not armed.
Exactly, whether they're armed or not. And again, that's a whole different dynamic of arming a person who is not normally used to carrying a firearm.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like if you're probably a person who wears a belt on an everyday basis, then it's no big deal. You don't have any problem about putting it on and wearing it and taking it off. You don't forget where you put your belt. But if you're not used to carrying a firearm, people are unfortunately not thinking about it. They may take it off for creature comfort. They may stick it in their desk drawer. They may take it off and put it on the back shelf, or they put them on the floor or wherever they go into the restroom facility to use the restroom.
Right.
And they're in a hurry. They're not thinking about it because that's not a piece of that they're normally wearing.
It's like your cell phone.
Exactly.
How many times you hear me, I set my cell phone down somewhere, I lost it.
Exactly.
You're saying people have been known to do that with guns too?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a different problem. So now let's say you're at a school and an individual a teacher puts that gun down and forgets about it or leaves it in the classroom desk drawer, and they're in the lunchroom now.
Yeah.
And they've left it in their classroom. What good is that gun if it's in the classroom?
Well, not to mention somebody who shouldn't get their hands on it does.
Exactly. Or what happens if we're going to leave it in the car? Now you have to run out to the car to try to get your weapon. And by the way, vehicle burglary is a very, very big crime in most jurisdictions.
Yeah.
So you leave it in your car, someone steals it. So there's a problem. So, but we don't want you to carry in a situation where you put yourself at harm's way based upon the law, because we don't want you to carry a gun illegally. If you do, you're going to get in trouble. You'll end up going to jail.
Have you had, or can you answer this, have you had any contact from schools, administrators about getting some of that kind of training for teachers unarmed?
Yes and no. That's about the best I can say.
Okay. Well, it seems like it would make a certain amount of sense. What do you think makes more sense? Hiring more armed guards for schools? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about what should we do to protect our kids.
We don't want Bonnie Fife security officer.
No,
Barney Fife
I'll
security
go on that.
officer who unfortunately is not the individual that we want to have on staff, because we need that person that's going to be vigilant about what they're doing. We want them to be competent, want them to be confident. We want them to instill confidence within the teachers, staff, in any facility, whether it's a school, whether it's a work site. Let's just say
sure.
KOH radio is gone to the point where you need 6 buildings now, a whole campus. So that individual that you're going to hire, you just don't want them sticking around at the front door, greeting people and shaking hands and eating donuts or whatever the case may be. You want that person to be competent. You want him to feel that this individual, he or she, can identify the threat, because there's observations of individuals who may be armed that you want to be able to notice as they're coming to your facility.
And that's part of what you do.
Absolutely.
Leading Edge Threat Mitigation. Folks who want to find out more about what you can do, leadingedgethreatmitigation.com, right?
Yes.
It's the website. Phone number?
843-0936. And again, that's area code 775-843-0936.
So armed, legally, unarmed. You've got any number of ways you can teach people to watch out for this kind of stuff. What to see ahead of time, mostly, right?
We want to teach some observation and awareness skills first.
Yeah.
And an awareness of what could happen. Second, we want to be able to teach them how to spot an individual who might be carrying a firearm illegally or with any kind of menacing ways. Thirdly, we want to teach them how to take on the shooter if they needed to, not to throw things at them, because we're not talking about a bear. We want you to be a large person and grow twice your size and then pick up staplers, because throwing a stapler or a tape dispenser at a person coming in to shoot you and he's got an AK-47, it's not the same match. It's not the same deal.
No, and you're probably drawing unneeded attention to yourself
You're
right
going to draw
away.
the fire. So you want to be able to teach that individual how to physically disarm the shooter and how to incapacitate the shooter with his own weapon or without his weapon.
Great. Good information. Joey Walker, Leading Edge Threat Mitigation. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for